As leaders and managers, we should have empathy for the challenges and uncertainty our teams are facing and commit to doing all we can to lead with that same focus on empathy. This quote is from an article Denise Mueller recently authored for the publication Life Science Leader. Denise, who is a global biotech and pharmaceutical executive, is joining me today to share tips for leading through ambiguity while keeping empathy at the heart of her approach. This is E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. Welcome to the show today, Denise. It's so nice to have you here. I was really looking forward to this conversation, mainly because you and I share something very important in common, and that is we've both led people through change in our workplace. And I can't wait to hear from you, because what I noticed leading people through change is with all the uncertainty and ambiguity, it really stokes fear. The questions that I would get as a change management lead were things like, is my job title going to change? Is my manager going to change? Is my role even going to exist in a few months? I mean, there are just so many questions that people ask themselves when a company is going through major change, especially when times are uncertain and the economy is volatile. And I also came across the article that you wrote for the publication Life Science Leader that talks all about leading through ambiguity. And I'd love to know what motivated you to write that article to begin with.
I was really inspired not only by the major restructuring that happened within my organization at the beginning of the year, where we cut basically the organization in half. And I work for a European biotech, and a lot of the folks there had never actually experienced anything of that magnitude. And so I spent a lot of time with them, the people impacted, and also those that were staying. And everybody was dealing with anxiety and fear, and people couldn't even be productive. And then I took a step back and I was talking to my network about this, and then watching the news, realizing that there is seemingly an unprecedented amount of change and uncertainty within the industry, not just biotech. Every day you wake up and you read about a biotech company having their organization or folding up shop, but also large pharma. Genentech just announced a major restructuring, and Pfizer had announced a major restructuring. So my network is full of pharma folks, and in talking to them, they were echoing that even once a restructuring had happened and they were quote unquote on the other side of it, there was this lingering fear about more uncertainty because of the amount of changes people are reading about and the frequency that it was happening. And so I thought maybe this is a time for us to talk about it and find a way to, I don't want to say embrace it, because it's really hard to think about people being uncertain about, where they're going to be getting resources to put food on the table. But,
Yeah.
Instead of getting depressed about it or doing nothing, I thought, well, maybe we should be talking about a way to help lead through it that could be more helpful for both the remaining organization and the organization that was no longer. So I thought it was a good time to let's just put it out there. Let's start the conversation all over and see how people are feeling.
I think it's very brave of you to do that, and also just the right thing to do. Because I, on my side of the fence, have also seen the same anxiety across the industry. It's true, you think at the other side of a restructuring, then everything's fine, right? Everything's
It's
good. But no, actually, what you leave in your wake is employees who are feeling disenchanted, wondering if they're next on the hit list, not sure about the future.
right. And people have PTSD. Oh, remember organizing for growth and reimagine. They always have names for in the big pharma companies, these reorganizations. And everybody who's lived through one of them, they actually still remember the name of the restructuring. And it's because it was that meaningful to them, even if they weren't impacted. When Pfizer bought Wyeth, I remember living through that 10, 11 months of, diligence and whatnot. I was going through the loss of a parent, and, my marriage was falling apart, and this acquisition was happening. And, I remember that feeling very well, and the fear and anxiety. And so I think I really tapped into it this year, given our own organization and just what I'm seeing in the industry.
What I loved about the main message that the article conveyed was you really emphasized the ability leaders have to turn challenges into opportunities. And I think many people don't really look at a restructuring as opportunistic, perhaps. And this is really one of my own personal philosophies. I always look at a challenge as a way to find opportunity. I love to hear how you've embedded this philosophy into your leadership style.
I think it just became part of my DNA back to the time I was referencing when Pfizer was buying Wyeth, and it's a very difficult time in my life, but at the same time, father was struggling with cancer, my marriage was breaking up. I was in fear of what the new organization would be if I had a job and I was going to be a single mom. I remember just sitting at my kitchen table at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning because we were also getting rid of my group. So I was the disease area lead for musculoskeletal, and we were going to be getting rid of that. So I was finding jobs for all
Hmm.
of my people. I was also launching a drug in Europe. I was catching up on work at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, something has to give. And I just said, what about if I just stopped for a second and thought about doing things differently? I could sit here and think about all of the things that are negative and hard to deal with and anxiety provoking in my life right now, because it was a lot. And I thought, I want to be positive. I'm not a glass half empty. I always try to find what's positive in it, because you can do that or you can cry. And so I was done crying. So I basically just took a step back and said, okay, what are the things that I really need to focus on from a business perspective? And what are those priorities? But what are the priorities for my people? And so I basically stopped working and just started saying, if I could do one thing for the business, what would it be? If I could do two things for the business, what would it be? And then I thought about those things and I'm like, well, who do I need to get those things done? And I started to see a way of, well, you know what? I need this done, and this person is going to lose their job, but maybe they can stay on a little longer and help with this particular business opportunity. And it was like near term, short term opportunities. And I'll give you the example. So there was a woman who was working in the business development department, and I had been close with the BD department. I was working in commercial, and she was going to be losing her job. I didn't know her, but my BD guy, who was a friend of mine, came to me. He's like, look, this woman's going to be losing her job. I think she could really be helpful on this one project you have going. Could you put her on a secondment or whatever? And I looked at her experience and what we were trying to do, which was in the realm of alliance management, business development, and some other things that would have been helpful to have someone have contract experience. And we basically created an opportunity for her. And so her wave date got extended by 9 months, then it got extended 12 months. And then all of a sudden things turned around and I was able to put her on the business full time. But it would not have occurred to me if I just didn't shut the noise off. It was kind of like this moment in my career that just changed. And honestly, by doing less, I actually got promoted. And it really highlighted for me the importance of doing the right things with the right people. It's not doing everything and really paying attention to the people. I think that's where it came from. And ever since that time, because it was so real at such a meaningful point in my life, it was also a point in my life. Well, great. This woman ended up coming over and we got a business objective done and she ended up having a full-time job. But my father actually ended up passing away during the same period. And I remember the boss that I had at the time. And in all of this, he was a great example. And so it kind of was this, I'll say, unfortunate serendipitous time in my career that through real example of how the power of that works, that I think made me a believer and fundamentally changed my DNA in terms of my leadership style.
That's incredible because what you said about doing less was actually more and it got you promoted. That's compelling to me. Because I think of someone at your level, a busy executive. You just think of someone who's working 80 hours a week, and barely has time for family and is just, juggling everything. And then if you're also dealing with a major restructuring or change in your organization, that adds an added layer of stress and anxiety for senior leaders. And I saw this firsthand when I was working with senior leaders and through change. I felt like they just, because they were under so much pressure, they simply didn't have the oxygen to think about something like empathy, for example, or taking care of people. They were just, trying to get through the day. So what would your advice be?
Well, I would argue, I guess that example is like whenever there's that much stress, yes, we're busy, but let's be clear. I believe there are times in your career where you're going to work, night and day, but that is not sustainable ever. And with my teams, and this is related but separate, let's take a step back, guys. And what are the things that need to get done that are going to drive the business? And there are going to be certain things that we choose not to do. And I will accept accountability for the things we choose not to do. But I have found that in the times of restructuring, it's easier to focus on the tactical, busy stuff than to focus on the people. I have always made time. If someone says, "Hey, Denise, you have 5 minutes," I might be in the middle of trying to get something done. I will always make the time. And I think that's because I need to be true to who I am as a leader. And I want to be the leader that people like, Denise was always there for us. Leading to what advice I would have for leaders is trying to be authentic to who you are. And this is where the concept of trust comes in for me. And that a key element of building trust is empathy. And people forget that. I think about how do I want to be known? How do I want to be seen? How do I want to be talked about? And you have to accept a certain amount of vulnerability to tap into empathy. But without authenticity, vulnerability, empathy, it's much harder to build trust. And then if you don't have trust, you don't get grace from anybody, from your board, from your boss, from your team. And so really thinking about the mileage that trust can deliver for you and then focusing how you build that. Nobody likes perfect. Nobody. And I am not perfect. I have no problem being vulnerable and genuine and empathetic because it's who I want to be when I go to bed at night. And I don't want to be somebody I'm not when I'm at work. Now granted, people see me as very driven at work. At home, I'm pretty laid back in terms of what movie do you want to see? I don't care. I just care if people are having fun. At work, I'm not so much like that. But other than that, I am pretty much the same person. Leading with empathy also requires a certain amount of self-reflection that is uncomfortable for people. You have to sit back and be like, okay, am I the leader? What's my internal dialogue? And am I being the leader that I want to be? And I am. I think it's also underestimating the impact of human capital. I think to myself, oh, I want to do epic things in my career. I do. And can't do epic things you need epic people. And epic people will not follow you if you are a person that is not trustworthy and that they would, jump off a cliff for. And how do they trust you? Because you're there. Because you're there and engaged. And to be engaged and human, you have to have a certain degree of empathy. And it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's so much easier to not focus on the human element, right? Because it's just numbers and tactics and it's about the business. And it's uncomfortable to be able to be empathetic, but also support the business because it's seemingly this conflict for folks that they can't figure out how to navigate it. But you're a leader, so you're being paid to be uncomfortable. That's the way I look at it. I want to do epic things. I want epic people to follow me. And so I lean in with this because it's proven to really be effective. I have a great team that I would follow them and they would follow me. And that's because we actually all trust each other implicitly, but they have empathy for me too. I mean, that's the other thing. empathy goes both ways. I'm sure you've had a boss who wasn't empathetic, and then they ended up in a situation that was horrible, and they're kind of like maybe venting to you a little bit, and you're like, well, what do I care? You're the boss. You made those decisions. I mean, honestly, I've been there.
Sure.
Okay, everybody has. I've had situations where I'm like, okay, guys, this is like I'm in a tough spot here, and you know what they say? Yeah, okay, Denise, we get it. You know, the decision on restructuring. I said, look, we didn't have a lot of good choices and I'm transparent. And so I'm accountable for this. But you know what? The trust, which is anchored in empathy and vulnerability, bought me grace and understanding. And it's worth it.
That's huge. And you know what I love about talking to you, Denise? I remember the first time I met you, we didn't know each other,
No.
and you just gave me this sense of calm and welcoming. Just
Most people think I'm like this ball of energy, like, oh my God, it's too much.
well, I mean, I guess what I wanted to communicate was I feel like a lot of people in the middle layer of the organization and below look up to senior executives as, I don't know, on a pedestal, or they're up in the ivory tower somewhere, and that there seems to be this huge gap or distance, right, between the executives and the worker bees. And what I don't feel that with you at all. I mean, if we stripped job titles off our LinkedIn pages, I just see you as another human who cares about people.
Good, because that's what that's my leadership style. So I remember when I was promoted to CBO and I had a big birthday, and one of the scientists and I went to dinner. We had done the Genentech field together, and so we were really close. I wasn't a C-suite, when I started, and so we went. And he's like, "I can't believe I'm having dinner with the CBO." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "I'm just Denise, And I always tell my people, I don't care about titles. It's irrelevant. Someone else could be in my shoes, and I could be a worker bee. There are plenty of people smarter than me. Plenty of people smarter than me. I just happen to have a specific function, and that comes with a certain title. But I don't exist, and I can't be successful without my team. And my dad taught me everybody's important. The admin and the janitor are probably more important than you realize, Denise, because they empty the trash can and they know everything that's going on in your life. And this is obviously before like the internet and stuff,
Yeah.
but it's true. We just have different functions, but it doesn't speak to the fact that everybody's important. I'm just a human. I'm just a mom. I had issues with one of my kids. It was in crisis, mental health. And I told my team, I'm like, look, this is what's going on. And they were grateful that I shared, surprised that I shared. I said, look, I just don't know how I'm going to manage this. And I may not be in the right mindset to handle certain things. And instead of you guys wondering what the hell's going on with Denise, I just thought I would share this with you. And that's another thing that I think brought me a lot of grace. I'm no different than anybody else, really, no better. It's words on a page.
I love that. I remember talking to a chairman of the board a couple of years ago, and he was giving me some advice on leadership. And he said, Rebecca, leadership can be very lonely because people perceive you as this untouchable thing off in the distance. And he said, I always made a deliberate effort to go into the labs and talk to the scientists,
me
to
too.
shake people's hands, to walk through the cafeteria and sit down with people, because I, just as the employees, needed that human connection with my people.
When I'm in Germany, I spend all of my time with non-C-level. I go out to dinner with not my peers because I see them all the time. When we had labs, every morning when I walked in, I made a tour of the entire building, walked in through the labs, and even we at a point in time when we were growing so fast, I'd be like, "Hi, I'm Denise. We haven't met. I think you're new, right?" And they were like, "Yeah, I know who you are." I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't know who you are." Like people were surprised, like, "Oh, Denise, will you make time for me on this?" I'm like, yeah, sure. Or I was just there and I went to lunch with one of the program managers. And she was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much for making time for me." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's actually the favorite part of my job. I said, "You're actually doing me a favor because I crave this interaction. I want to hear what's on people's minds." But I agree with what he told you. Yeah. It can be, and people have these false perceptions about what it's like. The boardroom is pretty mundane most of the time.
Nothing exciting, just the
No,
run of
it's
the
like
business.
true. It's like, what's the quality assurance report? What's the risk register? Okay. What's the P&L? Occasionally, if you're doing business development and you're getting close to signing a deal, it gets kind of exciting, but it's really not that exciting.
Oh, this has been a very refreshing conversation. Just to kind of wrap things up, for those leaders out there who, even after listening to this dialogue, are like, I don't know, I just don't have the bandwidth to do this thing called empathy, or walking around and talking to people. It's like, I have this to-do list. It's like 15 bullets long, and I don't even know how to start. There's too much. How do I cope? What would you say to that person who's still questioning whether or not this is important for them or that it will drive results?
That list is going to be there tomorrow, but the person that you need to make a connection with may choose to do something else tomorrow. It's always going to be there. I have my list. I'm a pen and paper girl because I like to put that green check mark next to the box, and it's easy to get emotionally wed to that list, but that list will always be there. The people on your team, if you don't invest with them, why should they stick around and be there? That's what I would say. The list will always be there.
The list will always be there. Well, thank you, Denise. This has been a really enlightening conversation. It's so nice to talk to someone at your level of the business who's really focusing on taking care of people, and it certainly gives me hope for the corporate world and for the future of business leaders out there.
Great, Rebecca, it was a true pleasure today, and look forward to continuing the dialogue with you.
This podcast is designed to help busy business leaders create an inspired and engaged workforce. I am building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you know someone who I should interview or should be a part of this community, please connect with me on LinkedIn. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.